Star Wars is dead for $50. MCU for $20. Star Wars is dead for $20. I used to sell toxic poison to kids to feed my habit and make money, and I went to jail. Now I sell toxic poison to kids to feed my habit and make money on YouTube.
Is Disney dead? According to certain corners of the internet, Kathleen Kennedy will be sacked any day now, and soon the mouse is going to have to hit the streets to supplement his income. I'm not sure if any of those things are going to happen. And I'm not talking as a Disney stan. Truthfully, I don't care about Disney. However, I recognize many little girls and women do. Even if some middle-aged men on the internet pretend they're disenfranchised, I'm not convinced they were ever the target demo that would be watching the Cinderella remake to begin with. In fact, the many videos they make about Disney products only further demonstrates the great power the rodent wields. They know they get clicks when they talk about his brand, and the reason for that is people care. On the show Friday Night Tights, Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers talks candidly about how they rage farm Disney.
Bro, Five Nights at Freddy's is dominating at the fucking box office, and we're talking about Loki.
We talked
Five
about
Nights
it.
at Freddy's is making more money than any film in recent memory. We're talking about Loki. I'll talk about One Piece right now. Let's talk about it. I fuck this Loki bullshit. I haven't watched it. I don't give a fuck about Marvel. Let's talk about One Piece and Five Nights at Freddy's right now.
No.
Oh, okay then. Well, then don't sit there and tell me that people aren't talking about it. You don't want to talk about it.
Jeremy,
welcome to every video we make. We use one little thing and then we build the narrative out of it. Don't act like that's not what we do.
I don't build a narrative. I give my opinion.
Fucking
you are hard. We do. Shit. You've made the same fucking video on the same topic at least 7 times a week, Ryan.
Again, this isn't an endorsement of Disney or its current business strategies, but I think two things can be true at once. Perhaps these middle-aged men care more about clicks and views and money than they do about a culture war, and perhaps Disney is in a creative rut. As previously mentioned, I'm no fan of Disney, and never have been. I've never wanted to watch their animations and only do it when my baby forces me at gunpoint. However, this isn't because I think the animations are bad. On the contrary, they're an amazing work of art. But I prefer watching things made for boys. But as I've gotten older, I've developed a profound respect for Walt's tenacity and creative vision. Walt wasn't all that great of an animator alone, but he was a genius when it came to finding talent, bringing out the best in others, and uniting artists behind a common goal. In his prime, his animators discovered a number of principles necessary to create an entertaining animation. These are now referred to as the 12 principles of animation. Amongst them is the principle of exaggeration. Animation is a special art form because it isn't supposed to look real. You can exaggerate movement and physical features to convey ideas. This is how Walt explained exaggeration. The first duty of a cartoon is not to picture duplicate real action or things as they actually happen, but to give a caricature of life and action. However, modern Disney animation seems to throw this out the window. Pumbaa the Warthog was a beloved character to many, but imagine if this was his first rendition. Sure, it's less exaggerated, but is that a good thing? Many of these remakes scored a high ROI at the box office, but that doesn't make them artistically successful. Many ask if Disney is dead. Today we are going to examine this claim by exploring what brought their company to life in the first place: animation. Disney's brand and empire was built with 2D animation, something it abandoned 15 years ago. Why did they do that? Perhaps in order to understand the fall, we need to understand Disney at its peak. Disney's first feature-length animation was Snow White, the oldest surviving traditional animated feature film. Walt's vision for 2D animation was much different from anything previously created. He wanted to create a feature-length, hand-drawn animation with stunning detail and vibrant color. Walt's vision for the medium seemed insane. Many Hollywood executives warned him that no one would want to watch a long cartoon, believing cartoons could only be small slapstick gags. Even his brother Roy and his wife tried to talk him out of it, but Walt envisioned his artists creating a groundbreaking work that would shake the entertainment industry. 90 years later, we can just see how impressive Snow White is. Let's compare it to Prince Ahmed, a stop motion just made 10 years prior. I'm not trying to knock Prince Ahmed, on the contrary, it was one of the first attempts to animate a feature film, and the filmmakers made plenty of ambitious innovations with special effects and the filming process as a whole. Clearly though, Walt's animation is superior to anything else made at the time, and some even argue that it's still superior to anything produced today. Every second of the film was made of 12 individual drawings. That may not sound like much, but keep in mind the film is 83 minutes long, so multiply that by 60 and then by 12. Nearly 60,000 individual drawings made with such vivid detail. Creating such an expressive and vivid imagery is extremely painstaking. It requires teams of artists who are each assigned with an extremely compartmentalized task, a visionary leader who can move each team in the right direction and piece everything together. Not to mention the animators at Disney at the time were mostly simple cartoonists, many of whom who had only previously drawn in newspapers. If Walt was going to bring his studio to the promised land, he would also need his artists to drastically increase their skill and learn new styles. This required the help of several European artists and also the animators to participate in art classes. After 3 grueling years, the film was ready to go. Still, many wondered if it could succeed. Walt packaged his best animations into a feature-length film to see if he could keep an audience entertained for the whole hour and a half. Despite the heavy economic downturn from the Great Depression, Walt drew people in droves. Snow White quickly rose to become the most viewed film with sound. A few years later, Fleischer attempted to ride off of Disney's coattails, producing their own color animation, Gulliver's Travels. This grossed half of what Snow White did. Fleischer Studios was remarkably similar to Disney. Both studios were run by a pair of ambitious brothers, and it seemed both studios were gunning to become the kings of feature-length animation. However, Fleischer had a great schism after Dave Fleischer had an affair with his secretary, and their next film was released only 2 days prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. This was a very stirring time in America, and animated films weren't exactly the nation's top concern at this time. With this commercial failure and tension between two brothers, the company tapped out of their fight with Disney, leaving only one major American animation studio to weather the 40s. Disney maintained their status as kings of cartoon animation into the 50s, as there was only one other American studio that made one of these animated films. That was 1001 Arabian Nights, which bombed at the box office. The 50s seemed to be the peak of Disney animation, with subsequent releases that garnered high box office sales, but also managed to create an enjoyable story. That was until 1959 when Sleeping Beauty failed to make a profit. The Shaggy Dog, on the other hand, did pretty well. Walt was very distraught with the Sleeping Beauty's dismal performance in theaters. Animating a film required so much artistic ability, along with time and money, compared to producing a live-action film like The Shaggy Dog. Walt was almost a visionary man, creating stories and telling them in a way no one ever thought they could. But the people didn't really seem to understand. They couldn't understand. They were blind. Perhaps this helps us understand a little better why only one other American studio animated a feature in the entire decade. Very few people had the mental capacity to move so many teams of artists to bring a picture to life. Also, few had the psychological endurance necessary to foot the heavy bill of several years of expenses with no promise of profit, just hope. The Sleeping Beauty seems to have been the beginning of the end for 2D animation. Walt now shifted his focus from animation to live action. In the 60s, he produced half as many animations as he did the decade prior, but he made 2.5 times more live-action films. The Disney company also expanded drastically, and Walt's health was declining. He would pass away in 1966. Many critics consider the Disney 60 films to be inferior to those of the 50s and the 40s. This downward trend accelerated into the 70s, and many of the key animators were aging out, and many wondered if Disney was even capable of making animations like they did decades prior. In 1979, Don Bluth, Gary Goldman, and John Pomeroy departed from Disney and formed Blue Studios. This would become a big contender in the 80s. Blue Studios would go on to produce films like The Land Before Time, American Tail, and Anastasia. In 1985, Disney released The Black Cauldron, an adaptation of Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain, which garnered a large amount of fans in the 60s and 70s. The Chronicles of Prydain was loosely based off of Welsh mythology, just like my book Long Live the Liar. While it was geared for kids, it was still much darker and serious than most things Disney had made at that time. Most of the Disney films were very loosely inspired by other works, such as Cinderella, Mary Poppins, or even The Shaggy Dog. These stories rarely stuck to the script and oftentimes removed key details. Generally though, the viewer didn't care. Maybe because these modern adaptations were more suited for modern audiences, or maybe just because people hadn't read the source material. In the case of The Black Cauldron, however, fans were very upset with the levity of the characters and the slapstick humor. The movie was more than just a failure, it was considered a disgrace, and much of Disney's goodwill had been lost. With Disney in shambles, Don Bluth Studios filled the void that Disney had left. Then seemingly from nowhere in 1989, Disney came back with an animated feature that invigorated fans and critics alike, The Little Mermaid. It hit the box office like a storm, raking in millions. This success was later followed by The Lion King, now with 2 animated films considered to be a success not just at the box office but more importantly artistically. Disney may once again be crowned the king of animation, but the rise of Bluth Studios proved that Disney's crown wasn't certain. Warner Bros. Along with others attempted to join the mix and claw for the crown. This resulted in films like Cats Don't Dance, The Quest for Camelot, and The Iron Giant, all of which took massive hits at the box office. Don Bluth's final theatrical film, Titan A.E., had an estimated $75 to $90 million budget. It only earned $36.8 million. By the early 2000s, only Disney was left standing, and they managed to churn out a number of films with sci-fi and fantasy elements. These were sort of like the ones that Don Bluth Studios and Warner tried producing, but they still managed to keep a profit. That is, until they made Treasure Planet. At this point, Disney stopped trying to fill the void that Warner had left and moved back to spin-offs of previous works and new cartoons about animals. They also began working much closer with Pixar until they outright bought them in 2006. Disney was now focusing on 3D animated films, which were much easier to make. Disney attempted to draw another princess animation, and while it still turned a profit, Disney deemed it a failure. Ed Catmull, one of Pixar's founders, blamed this on the marketing and was very distraught that Disney didn't want to continue making 2D animation. Regardless of the cause, Disney decided they wouldn't start any more 2D animation projects, only finishing up the film they already had in production, Winnie the Pooh. This is how 2D animation films came to an end. Don Bluth attempted to have a final shot at 2D animation by pitching the internet for help. He launched a Kickstarter to make an animated feature about the video game Dragon's Lair. It failed, but he moved to Indiegogo where he garnered $731,172. In 2020, Netflix made an initial agreement to produce the film, but it would be made to be live action. Few updates have been made since. So is Disney dead? Financially speaking, many critics cite Disney's stock price, and sure, it's dipped on various occasions. In 2021, it reached an all-time high, almost hitting $200. Now it's sitting at half that amount. Perhaps that may sound like a victory to some. However, looking at the historic price of Disney stock, we learn a much different story. In 1984, one share just sat at over $1, and it's now at a 100 times increase. However, artistically speaking, at least in my opinion, their modern remakes have lost the magic of Walt's original films, and that Disney is incapable of creating the great works that they once crafted. While discontinuing 2D animation may have seemed like a good financial decision, I think it's a creative blunder. There is a magic that only 2D animation can provide, and while we can't find it at Disney, there are many amazing animations being produced today. We can find them in the indie sphere and also in distant shores. I think it's important to highlight these amazing works as well. Click to the left to learn about an amazing animation made by an indie studio, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.